I compensate with testosterone, man.
No, you do. You're fucking handsome.
Yeah.
No swearing, yeah?
No, swear as much as you
No,
want.
I don't want to swear. I don't
No,
want
but
to
please
swear.
do. We're very open-minded.
So, am I alright? Do we do it in English, Spanish, French, or Chinese?
Spanish?
Do you really want to do it in Spanish?
¿Hablas español?
Sí, hablo español, tío. Estoy haciendo las entrevistas en México.
Mira a ver.
Sí, para Televisa. He hecho ya unas entrevistas.
Welcome back to Studio MMA, and I'm joined here by English journalism powerhouse and zombie apocalypse enthusiast,
no.
Gareth A. Davies. How are you doing, Gareth?
Oh, it's really well, thank you. Don't bring the zombie apocalypse enthusiast stuff up too much, because I'm a bit obsessed with it at the moment. It's brilliant to be here. It's brilliant to be in Stockholm. Third time, and it's great to be on your show finally.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming.
It's a real honor, thank you.
I'm just disappointed, but now this interview is going to be about half as long as I was planning because we're throwing the zombie category out. But that's all right. We'll keep rolling. Now, for our Swedish viewers, I'm sure most people are familiar with you now. You're one of the more known MMA reporters and journalists in Europe.
One of the longer-haired ones.
One of the longer-haired ones, and one of the longest speaking ones as well when it comes to interviews.
Yeah, my questions are very long.
Yeah, but you started off with a lot of boxing journalism, correct?
That's right, yes.
And when exactly did you get into MMA reporting?
Into MMA reporting, it was late 2006, so it's 8 years now. Mm-hmm. It really coincided with Michael Bisping's time in the UFC.
Oh yeah?
And, you know, it was the right time to do it. I think before that, and also, I suppose, coincided with the UFC's move into Europe. Mm-hmm. And it took an awful lot, really, for the Telegraph newspaper, which I don't know what the equivalent is in Sweden, but, you know, it's a broadsheet, conservative with a capital and small c newspaper. So it took a lot of persuading with my editors to allow me to cover the sports in the Telegraph. You know, most people say, oh, that's a very unlikely bedfellow, the UFC and the Telegraph.
And yet, here we are 8 years later, and...
Well, the funny thing is, at the time, the reason why the board accepted it and the reason why it was so easy was because the Telegraph was going through the transition of wanting to get a bigger audience in America, a bigger audience online, and a much younger audience. And if you put those three things together, that's UFC, that's MMA, very modern, viral online, but at the same time, very much of the now, and they said, yeah, go for it. So, you know, from there, from that small acorn, you know, I'm now allowed to decide to go, you know, to pretty much 15 events around the world each year, which allows me to get a fairly broad coverage of what's going on, mainly in the UFC.
Yeah. And when you first started reporting, how long had you sort of been into MMA, and like how long had you known about it?
I've always known about MMA. I didn't really follow it properly because I was very involved in other sports. I've always been interested in martial arts, though. You know, I spent a year living in China in the late 80s, 25 years ago, and I'd always taken an interest in martial arts. You know, and I think sometimes I think I even come at mixed martial arts in the wrong way because I hope that every fighter is a martial artist as well.
Right.
They're not all that way, but I do try and explore that with all the fighters because I think it has a special, almost mystical quality about it. I think many of the guys, even though they're incredible fighters, are quite mystical in the way they live.
Yeah. Do you remember the first MMA fight you ever saw in its entirety?
The first MMA fight I ever saw in its entirety, well, it would have been, I remember Michael Bisping, live was Michael Bisping and Rashad Evans, but whatever the first fight on that card was, back in Newark, New Jersey, I can't remember what the first fight was. That's the first fight I had. Well, it was kind of with the American audience. Was actually at the fighter weigh-ins at that event. So I think it was UFC 70 or 78, where BJ Penn was on stage being interviewed, And I thought, well, I'll go there. I pulled my hood up, went and grabbed the microphone, and I asked BJ Penn, how do you feel about a few of us Brits? We're few, we're many. We're few, but we're many. We've come over here to see Michael Bisping whop some American butt. And I think I had some empty bottles thrown at me, from, the plastic ones, from some of the guys in the crowd, and I got booed by everyone in there. But it was kind of, I thought, I really like this atmosphere because people get it. You know, there's a lot of banter in MMA. There's a lot of there's a lot of smack talk that's humorous as well, I think. And so that was the first event I covered live. But I've watched. I can remember. This sounds weird, but right back to the early '80s, I can remember. I had friends. We used to do nunchucks. We used to do all sorts when
Did you manage to do nunchucks without hitting yourself in the face?
No, and the nuts.
Yeah.
Oh, the nuts. Oh, on the elbow.
Elbows too. Yeah.
That's not much fun. And the weird thing was, I always used to hang out with the hard kids at school. I went to private school, but I always used to hang out with the hard nuts.
Private schools have hard kids?
Yeah, they do. They do. The lunatics, basically.
Okay.
Who used to kind of go out of the
rich kid serial killers.
Rich kid serial killers, yeah. Well, I mean, that's not fair. They're probably watching. They're not serial killers. They're just lunatics.
Yeah, they're probably the bosses of army kids. Okay, there we go.
You know, trying to live up to the reputation of their fathers. But we knew about the Gracies back then, believe it or not.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because there was always this. I remember we used to talk about. Or the guys I used to hang out with were very aware of what the Gracie family did. That there was this family in Brazil who we always talked about as the hardest family on earth. And when you look at it now, they're not necessarily the hardest family on earth, but they've just got a fighting style. And so it goes back to early 80s, believe it or not, when I was in the sixth form at school. That we were just kids, but we had a massive interest in martial art. I loved Bruce Lee as well, you see. Had him on my wall. What I liked about Bruce Lee was that he was small, he was incredibly confident, he was a brilliant fighter, but he always had the rose for the lady as well, or the romantic moment. You know, he was the guy that wasn't looking for trouble, but he could always sort out the trouble. You know, so in a way I've always loved that, and the reason I went to China in the late 80s was I wanted to learn about energy. You know, I did wushu when I was there, and I studied kind of qigong and breathing exercises, and I've always been interested in all those kind of things.
All right, interesting. Well, bouncing off of the whole thing about all the banter in MMA, we were speaking earlier with some colleagues about the level of banter, because MMA, unlike a lot of other sports, it's not just about the sport. There's also always an entertainment factor. In more so than in any other sports, you get to see the personality and character of these athletes, as opposed to just seeing them as normal athletes.
I think you get to see more than that. I think in fight sports, you see a man or woman's soul. And I've had some very privileged moments. I think when you get to interview them live on television, moments after they've fought, and I think winners and losers here, there's a real privilege about being very close to them, you know, and you're the same. You get on very well with fighters because they understand that you care about them, and that you are interested in their souls. And I think when you're close to a fighter, just after a fight or just before a fight, or you're allowed inside their dressing room with them, you get very close to someone's soul. They bear all when they go in there, and that's what I really love about them. And I think that's what I admire about them. But also, as an observer and as a columnist and as a commentator and an analyst on these things, I think you have to kind of have a love for fighters as well and care about them.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I have a rule, which is I will never write anything about a fighter or a fight that I will not say to their face. You know, some don't
here,
like it. You know, I would not ever do it. I'm not going. I might make fun of. I might say I love every acre of Roy Nelson, for example, but I do.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I mean it in a nice way. But I think it's a great rule to have. I'm pleased that you have that rule. We should be able to say that to them, because in the long run they will respect us more. They might not like it at the time. A lot of fighters are very sensitive about things you write or things you say, But in the long term, it's better to be honest.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Sometimes some fighters, they don't want to make predictions. They don't want to say that simply because of the fact that they might bump into the fighter who they thought was going to lose, and then the fighter will question him. Why did you think? What? You don't believe in me?
I feel exactly the same way about the UFC fighter rankings. I used to do them, and I don't do them anymore because they're made public.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. But when you're working, I work across podcast and TV, and have TV guests in a studio who are fighters, and I write, journalistically on the fighters. And when you cross over all those boundaries, I'm having fun with them on the podcast. We're having fun on TV. It's entertainment. I'm writing for people to read. If you are making a skill set judgment about the top 15 in each division, and you think you have to put him higher than him, it's a bit of a lottery when you do it sometimes. You go, well, okay, I'll do that. Because there is no science to it. And I think when fighters, when you're working with them in a professional capacity, together on television, together on a broadcast, together on a program, I feel it alters the relationship if they can see that you judge them Bisping at 9 and so at 6, and it doesn't work. I don't know if you still do.
Well, no, I don't. I haven't done the rankings, and I'm glad that I never will, because I might, like you said, it's very hard to judge a fighter's performance, put a number on it, and then for them to know that you perhaps don't think of them as highly ranked as somebody else.
No, I agree. It's just it's like classifying them, and there's lots of fighters who I haven't interviewed deeply yet. Mm-hmm. And I don't want them to come to me with preconceived notions about me. I'd love it if they'd read some things that I've written or seen something that I've done, because I try and do that about everyone I go and interview if I haven't interviewed them before. So I think it makes sense not to. I think rankings are weird.
Yeah,
they kind of help the whole coverage of the sport now. Mm-hmm. But I think if they are done, they should be done anonymously.
Yeah, well, on the topic of rankings, that's a hot issue. Some fighters, I think Jose Aldo, I believe it was, who went out and said that the rankings are completely useless. And then there's some fighters who, like you said, they'll get offended if they're not ranked in a specific order. And then if you look at some of these specific rankings from each journalist, sometimes you'll find completely different results. But what do you say? Overall rankings, good or bad?
Good. I think they are good, because I think they help us have a structure. I think if you look back at UFC 178, it was reminiscent of the cards when there was no rankings, when there were no rankings, and the card was full of meaning. Zingano, Cruz, Romero, Kennedy, McGregor, Cerrone. It was full of meaning. You didn't need rankings for that event. Yeah. It was clear that Zingano should have a title shot. It was clear that Cruz was back and should have a title shot. And for me, that reminds me of the UFC events we were watching 5 years ago, where the meaning was clear in an event, where every card felt more stacked. That because they only had, whatever it was, 280 fighters, and there were bearings on 4 divisions in each event. So now, with so many fighters and the fact that they are throwing the seeds out globally to try and talent ID the entire planet, maybe even universe, the rankings are important, because it allows a structure on which, for example, Ross Pearson can say, I want to fight Diego Sanchez, I want to chase this guy because I can see him there at 14. I want to fight Miles Jury. He's 9 in the lightweight division. Yeah. Give me Miles Jury. I can climb, and that's what's good. So it's not just all the pressure on Dana Lorenzo, Joe Silva, Sean Shelby, and a couple of other people. They've got something to base it on. Yeah. I think it's a good thing. Okay. But we shouldn't get obsessed with it. Maybe. And this has been suggested to me by high-level executives in the UFC before. It wasn't it was just a chat about things. Maybe we need even more complex super matrix ranking points,
Right.
which they do in other sports.
Yeah.
In baseball, they have it. In cricket, they have it where they judge your performance over a year, and it's based on the criteria, your fight metric stuff, for example.
Yeah.
So they can rank you, almost like pound for pound. You're ranked pound for pound.
Interesting thought.
No, it is an interesting thought. And look,
I think there might be some problems implementing it in terms of point
huge.
fighters and such.
But there's scientists out there with minds not like mine, anything like mine, that I'm sure could create an algorithm that can analyse a fighter and probably put them technically in a certain way. But as you well know yourself, one of the reasons why we're Octagon side, one of the reasons why we go to events and feel the energy of fighters is there's nothing like the smell and the sound and the feel and the intensity of being live as well.
Yeah.
Because you can feel things, you see things, expressions that you don't see on the television.
Absolutely.
Noises, you see panic, you see, a very strong recollection from last weekend was a couple of them, 4 of them there are really. The first one is the absolute brutality and commitment on the face of Dominic Cruz just in front of me, bashing Takeya Mizugaki. Like 3 years I've waited for this to come back. Kat Zingano on the bottom against Amanda Nunes with this expression of determination on her face in the first 3 minutes.
She reminded me of Braveheart there.
Exactly, like, you're crushing me right now, but I will have my moment in this fight.
And she sure did.
Die now, because I'm coming back to eat you. The third one was the brutality of the fight between Yoel Romero and Tim Kennedy, where I remember Kennedy coming across me with blood just screaming from his mouth like a 300 movie.
Yeah.
And looking at him, it was almost like watching him run away and get hit again and run away. And also thinking with those two guys, two of the most amazing physiques I've ever seen on fighters. How a white man and a black man with almost identical body shapes,
Yeah.
But when they're in their clothes, they don't look like big men, but they are enormous when they step into the octagon. And the fourth one was the Anderson Silva-like quality of Conor McGregor and the utter confusion etched onto the face of Dustin Poirier a minute into that fight. Literally feeling like he was being hit by a whirlwind, did not know what was hitting him. And you can't get those things by watching it on TV.
Exactly.
Do you know what I mean?
Oh, I remember my very first event that I saw live. It was a Swedish show, it was Superior Challenge, and it was actually Ilir Latifi was in the main event, and I was sitting cage side, and it was a third round, and it wasn't the most exciting fight, but in the third round he got his opponent down, and they were sitting right in front of me, and I was almost getting beads of sweat from his opponent in my face, and I could, and I remember just hearing the punches in a way that you can only do live.
Yeah.
And that was the first time when I most felt like, holy crap, this is an intense sport, because you really do feel it completely differently live.
I've been going to fights since 1990, really. So boxing since 1990, and it's almost like a proud moment when you get blood across a notebook, or
on your shirt.
You go to a dinner show, because a lot of boxing used to be you go in black tie, and you move up to literally the ring side and then go back to your table to eat, and you've got blood on your black tie with your on your white shirt, and it's almost like a badge.
It is a little bit,
and beautiful brutality is what it is, and it's the great thing about these sports. The great thing about fight sports is that I hate seeing violence in the street. I really hate it. People post things like that on YouTube, and it genuinely makes me feel sick.
Yeah.
I don't like violence in the street. I really detest violence in the street, and that's why I love the fact there's an arena for combat sports for people who love to fight. Absolutely.
Gareth, thank you very much for the time.
My pleasure, absolute pleasure.
We'll hopefully have you back next time.
Thank you.
All right. And for all of you back home, you can look forward to more interviews for the whole of Fight Week.